So you should have your copy of your notes in front of you as we go along, but now we're going to talk about evidence. So first we have a claim, and then we use our evidence to prove it. So this happens after our claim. It includes factual information to support your main claim. In our class, we're going to use word-for-word evidence because this is the most ideal method, but it's also the most clear and concise way to present that evidence. Now, the fastest way to ensure that you are doing your evidence correctly is to use a quote tag or an evidence starter, one of the two. So, for example, you could say in the article and then give the title. The author says, and then your quote goes here. On page blah, the author says, and the text it states. So you can use any of these to create your quote tag. Now, toward the top of your paper, I want you to write out these 3 things just anywhere on it, because every single time that you include evidence, you have to include these 3 things: the author, the title, and the page number. If there is no page number, obviously you don't write it, but there will always be an author and title. Another way of making sure that you have a quote tag in front of your evidence and you're properly citing it is by using this chart. So we used this once before during our Elements of Story unit, but just to remind you, all you do is pick a row and go across. So you would say, for example, Dr. Brunn writes approximately blah, 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 and then parenthesis, and quotes, the title, end quote, page number, and then a period at the very end. The reason you put the period at the very end, like all of these examples, is that otherwise you're starting a new sentence with the citation, and that is strange. Don't do that. Now, there are good examples of evidence and there are bad examples of evidence. To ensure you've got a good piece of evidence, you will use a quote tag, so those things we just went over. You will ensure that it supports the reasons stated in the claim, so your evidence and your claim need to match. It needs to be a fact, not an opinion. Your evidence should be about 2 sentences or max, just because you don't want somebody writing for you. You want to write your own. Write your own arguments, rather. 5, expands on the reasons stated in the claim. This essentially means that, again, your evidence and your claim need to match, and they can't just say the same thing. So if you're banning cell phones and you say that critics argue that banning cell phones is good, you're not really expanding on your evidence. And lastly, it needs to be a direct quote from an article that you have read. Now, bad evidence will not support the reason in the claim. In some cases, it might be entirely unrelated. In the worst cases, it is actually the opposite. So you chose a claim that, or you chose evidence that works better for a different claim. 2, it is presented without a quote tag, meaning you just put quotation marks around the quote and then drop it in. Even worse than that is that you don't give credit to whoever initially wrote it. That would also be quite a problem. And then lastly, it just restates the reason in the claim. That is not very helpful either. Now, how are we finding evidence? So just some general writing tips. When completing research, you want to use the research to establish your claims. What that means is you are looking to read first and then base your ideas off of the reading, and then you find evidence to support those claims. So you come up with your claims because of what you read, and then find evidence in the same things that you read to support it. Don't immediately use what comes to mind as your reason for your claim. When you do it, it becomes harder to find relevant evidence. If you cannot prove that your claim is valid, then you end up wasting a lot of time. So use your research to establish your claims. And then Use quality articles. So when reading the article, you're going to highlight or mark quotes that could be used as evidence, because then you have so much less to go back and read. Now, you should have an example of this on your own papers, but what you're going to do with this is you're going to find a quote that matches the claim. So our claim is right here. Students should not be able to use phones in school because they take away from student learning. So what I need you to do right now is I need you to read this little excerpt and find an example that shows that it takes away from student learning. Okay, awesome. Now that you have found it, what you are going to do next is you are going to properly cite that piece of evidence. So our title is right here, our author is right here, and this is page 1. So remember to use this chart to properly cite your evidence. Just pick a row, go across, filling in all of that information. So for me, the example that I chose was, first and foremost, a pocket-sized computer with access to the internet is a distraction during lessons. And you'll notice I put quotes around this because these are not my words. So step 1 would be to add your quote tag. Don't leave your quotes hanging. You got to provide that context. So my quote tag here is, for example, that's my transition. In the article, my indicator, I list the article. The author says, here's my verbs. Next is to add the direct quote. So same thing, and then what they say is this thing in quotes right here. Then lastly, you add a citation in parentheses, which is this. So Kelly was our author. This came from page 3. And then you put a period at the very end. So just to summarize, evidence needs to be placed after the claim. It needs to be relevant to the claim. It needs to be from a quality article. It needs to be introduced with a quote tag. That's what that chart is for. It needs to be a direct quote from the article, and it needs to be cited using a parenthetical citation.